I've never had that pleasure of seeing Mount Fuji in person, but maybe you have. Have you ever been to the mountain, to the Acropolis, the top of the city in Athens? Have you ever been to Visegrad? My friends, have you ever been to the tallest peak in Kenya and had the joy of looking out across the African plains? Have you ever gone through the Rhine Valley in Germany, going from one mountaintop to another mountaintop to another mountaintop with one castle after another? My friends, have you ever gone to the mountain? Have you ever been to that mountain in your life? What can we learn from the life of Moses? We're going to stay on this slide, stay on this first slide, okay? In Exodus chapter 3, if you've got your own copy of Scripture today, in Exodus chapter 3, is there something in the life of Moses that you can relate to? For the first 40 years of his life, he was born into the family of slaves, and then he was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. Can you relate to that at all? Did you grow up in a low-income situation, or did you grow up in a high-income situation? Not to criticize Moses according to his own words, even though he was living a life as Pharaoh's daughter, apparently he couldn't speak very well. He was slow of speech, according to his own words. So much so that when God said, yes, but I want you to go and speak to Pharaoh, he said, God, not me. Of all the things that you can ask. Yes, I have an entree into Pharaoh. Yes, I grew up in the household of Pharaoh's daughter. Yes, on one hand, that would be logical, God, that you would send me back to Pharaoh, but to speak? Not me. I can't do that. I'm slow of speech. Okay. Take your big brother, Aaron. Aaron's a good speaker, and so we'll work on that. So you take Aaron with you, and you go whenever I tell you to go. Have you ever had to run from the law? The next 40 years of his life, in anger, he killed a man. It became public knowledge. And as he became a known criminal, he fled. He ran away. He ran away from the household of Pharaoh because he was a fugitive. Has that ever happened in your life? Have you ever had to run away? If not because of something legal, because of something emotional, because of something personal? Have you ever been running away? And then can you imagine the change in his lifestyle? I don't know what it was like to live in Pharaoh's household. I don't know. But for the next 40 years of his life, he's going to be a shepherd. Wow. Have you ever gone through that kind of change in your life? That you went from one type of living environment to being a shepherd for 40 years? I can't even imagine. And during that season of his life, out there with the sheep, undoubtedly, if you've ever lived with the sheep, or if you've ever been a forester, or if you've ever worked on farms, if you've ever been out in that territory, okay? If you've ever been in that environment, even today, somewhere around the world, lightning's going to strike, and there's going to be a burning bush. If you've grown up your whole life in the urban setting, maybe this doesn't make sense to you, but if you've ever lived, worked outside on the farm, or with the cattle, or in the forest even, lightning strikes all the time around the world. Somewhere as we speak, there is a burning bush. But at the end of his 40 years as being a shepherd, as he's getting to be 80 years old, in that season of his life, one day, he sees a burning bush. And for whatever reason, that catches his attention. And he turns. And God notices that as he turns, God turns to Moses and begins to speak. He says, now I want you to go back. All those people that you were afraid of, they've all died. That was 40 years ago. Every family retribution that was looking for you, they're all gone. So you go on back. And as you go on back, I'm going to be with you. And then for the next 40 years of his life, even though he is given the most miraculous signs that we can imagine, for the next 40 years of his life, He leads a group of people who constantly grumble. Have you ever been in that position? You got a good job, but you're the boss, and oh my goodness, no matter what I do as the boss, it's going to be this or it's going to be that. Have you ever been so frustrated that you did something in anger? And because of that, God said, sorry, there will be some discipline in your life. Which part of Moses' story? Is there any part that you can relate to? Is there anything that you can imagine in your own life? Whether it was the first 40 years living in the Pharaoh's house, or the next 40 years being a shepherd out there with the flock, or the next 40 years, the last 40 years of his life, leading a group of people, over 600,000 people, not counting the men and women, not counting the women and children, just the men, it tells us in the scripture. Watching as God's punishment is demonstrated against that group of people because they were unfaithful to God, and then watching as a new generation comes up. Have you ever been in that kind of a situation? We'll go to the next slide. As we look today at Exodus chapter 3 in your own scripture, verses 7 through 12, we want to think about God's specific sign for you. We're going to look at the life of Moses. But as we look at the life of Moses, the intention is to look at our own hearts, our own lives, and to see what is God's specific sign for me, for you today. Okay, we'll go to that next slide. What is your sign? Okay. Many of you know your sign of the zodiac. Okay, you know if you're a Leo or a Libra, a Gemini or a Capricorn. Okay, you know that. You also know that's hogwash, right? You also know that. It's been proven that it's complete. I mean, it's absurdity, okay? But to this day, there are people that will say, well, that's my personality because I'm a Leo. Well, okay, Leo. Or well, I just can't get along with them because they're a Gemini and I'm a Libra. Okay, I mean, get over it, okay? Or if you're from China, you know this answer. I don't. What year is this? This is the year of the rabbit. Okay. In India, I'm sorry, Preeti, they have the 4 different cycles. I don't know what it is in India. Around the world, different cultures, different contexts. We know our sign. Okay, some form of trying to make sense of the world. It all comes down to that. If we can just make sense of the world, and so let's look at the stars and let's find some kind of a pattern, or let's look at the elements that we see in nature and find some kind of a pattern, or let's find some kind of a cycle, and it's going to explain why some people act like this and some people act like that. All around the world, in virtually every culture, apart from the Bible that we're talking about, if I ask you what is your sign, you know, okay, this is the modern culture. What's your sign in? What's your sign in to your, take your pick, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Google Drive, email, Gmail, WhatsApp, okay? What's your sign in? What's your login? What gets you into that connection? In Psalm chapter 19, David declared in Psalm 19, if you go and look at that in your own scripture, that God's glory is always being poured out. In fact, every night when we look at the stars, his speech transcends all languages. So every night around the world, God's glory is still being displayed. In Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 23, God is plainly demonstrated in creation, is how Paul begins chapter 1 of Romans. And we've turned against God and we've gone our own way. It's been plain to us, but we've gone our own way. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, Paul says, Jews demand signs, and Greeks look for wisdom. We're always looking for something that's going to satisfy this deep, deep desire that we have. With your own scripture, let's go to Exodus chapter 3, verses 7 through 12. The burning bush has happened. God has Moses' attention. And then in chapter 3, verse 7, the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. How far does it go on the screen for me? And to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey. People have been in bondage for over 400 years. And God says, yes, I know what my children have suffered. And yes, I care. And yes, I'm going to come to them. Can we go on the next slide? Get my place here. To the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites. Ooh, let me see if my old eyes can go back and forth. The Hivites and the Jebusites, verse 9. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. Verse 10. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Verse 11. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? Pause right there for just a moment, please. Who am I? Whatever your job is today, surely you had that moment that you said, who am I? If not, who am I? Surely you've had that moment that you said, why me? Of all the people that could be called upon to do this, well, why me? Isn't it always easier to point to somebody else and say, oh, ask him, ask her. They'll do a good job. I'll be behind you all the way. So then we go. This is God speaking in verse 12. He said, but I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you, that I have sent you when you have brought the people out of Egypt. You shall serve God on this mountain. Stay on this slide for just a moment. We're not trying to go into deep, deep analysis of Hebrew literature, but in some of our languages, you're able to read this verse with a certain clarity that for those of us in English, we miss. In some of your languages, it's built in, whether it's you singular or you plural. And in English, we don't have that. We don't have that built into our language, the way Hebrew, Greek, Russian, other languages have it baked in there. Okay, so in verse 12, if we pause for just a moment, God's saying to Moses, but I will be with you, singular, you, Moses. And this shall be the sign for you, you personally, Moses, you singular, Moses, okay, that I have sent you, Moses, you singular, okay? When you, Moses, you singular, when you have brought the people out of Egypt, there's going to be this sign. You're by yourself with me on the mountain today, right now. But today is going to come again when you're going to bring my children back with you. And when you bring my children back with you, here's going to be the personal sign for you, Moses. You, plural. All of you, you're going to come back here and you'll serve God on this mountain. We go to the next slide. Now, the signs in Moses' life, they are specific and they're spectacular. They are deeply personal for him. Sometimes, in fact, most of the time, all the signs that that are given him are public demonstrations. Moses, take the staff that's in your hand, throw it down. And those of you that have ever been in Sunday school, you know what happens. That staff turns into a snake. Whoa. Moses, take your hand, put it inside your cloak. Take your hand out, Moses. Oh, it's turned into leprosy. Panic. Panic. We don't panic like they did then, but now we get our kick from shock magicians. Okay? There are shock magicians, and we know that it's all a gimmick, but they take a knife and they start hacking on their blood's going everywhere. They stick a nail through their cheek or something like that. But this is not a magic trick. This is a miraculous public demonstration. Now put your hand back in the cloak. Now take it back out. It's restored. Take some water from the Nile, pour it out. Turns into blood. When you're in the desert and you need water, hit the stone and water comes gushing out. It goes on. There are so many signs that are going to be public, powerful demonstrations of God's power. But there's this very, very private moment. But Moses, here's what I'm going to give you. Next time you come back, you're going to have the joy to come back to this mountain. And you and I are going to experience worship once more. There are spectacular signs that are given to Moses' life. They are always personal. Many times they are public, sometimes they are private. Jumping to John's Gospel, jumping to the New Testament. In John chapter 4, we move from the story in the Old Testament, but we come to John chapter 4, verses 16 through 26. Jesus is in Samaria. He's thirsty. It's the middle of the day. A woman comes. We know because of other scriptures that she's coming because of her reputation. She doesn't want to interact with anybody else. Ever been in that situation? I've just had it. I don't want to interact with anybody else. I'm just going to slip in. I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to get out of town. Okay? So she comes, and in John chapter 4, verses 16 through 26, Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come here." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband.' For you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true." This woman was so desperately thirsty. And she tried relationship after relationship after relationship to quench that thirst. Ever been like that? You desperately need something. And you're trying this option and that option and this option and that option. He goes on in verse 19. The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet." Verse 20. I've got a great question. People have been asking for hundreds of years, literally, all the way since the Old Testament, as the Old Testament unfolds, all the chronology from Exodus, all the way until the 400, quote, silent years between the Old Testament and the New Testament. People have been asking this question for hundreds of years, and now I have you. You must be a prophet. So I'm going to ask you this deep spiritual. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, the Samaritan mountain, But you Jews, you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. This is tricky, so stick with me. We know the right answer immediately. We know the right answer. Who and who alone are we supposed to worship? God. But our hearts are prone to idolatry. Whether it's the idolatry of a literal golden calf, or the idolatry of a philosophy, or the idolatry of a teaching, our hearts, we instantly say the right answer. We know that we're supposed to worship God and God alone, but our hearts are so prone to idolatry. But see, she's going to get the right answer. I can solve the debate that's existed for hundreds of years between my people, the Samaritans, and you people, the Jews. I'm going to get the answer, and then I'm going to be the one to go back and say, I've talked to the man of God. I've got the scoop. This is the answer. Okay? But we go on to verse 21. Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father." Verse 22. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. Go on to verse 25 and 26. The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things." Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he." You're looking for the answer. Right here. I know this is confusing because I'm jumping from Exodus to the New Testament, but stick with me. If we go back to Exodus chapter 3, and God said, "Moses, I want you to go. I want you to bring all the people back." And if you read the next several chapters of Exodus, you'll see all of that happening. And then we come to chapter 19, and guess where Moses is once more? He's right back at that mountain. And it is such a spectacular sight of God's glory that the people are frightened. They're afraid. And in fact, God speaks to Moses and says, "Moses, you come on up here, but you tell the rest of the people not to touch the mountain." Okay? And as we continue to read carefully Exodus chapter 19 and Exodus chapter 20 and following chapters, the tragedy, the people have been miraculously rescued. God said to Moses, "Bring everybody back here." He brings everybody back here. God says, "Come on up here. I'm going to give you something special." He gives him the 10 Commandments written in stone. I'm sorry, this is humorous, okay? Haven't you ever used that phrase? "Well, is it written in stone?" Well, yes, as a matter of fact, so that there's no, questioning what they got. Yeah, I'll even write it in stone, Moses, and I'll give it to you, and you take it back down to the people. Stick with me. And while he's having this fantastic encounter with God on top of the mountain, the people who have all been rescued down below, they get worried because he's been gone too long. And they say to his big brother, "Take all of our gold and form for us a golden calf that we can start worshiping, because we don't know what's happened to Moses." My heart is so fickle. The Bible tells me, guard your heart, because it is the most fickle thing of everything in the world. And how much more graphically can it be described than in this situation, people who have been rescued after 400 years of slavery, people who have seen sign after sign after sign. When there's a delay while Moses is on top of the mountain, they panic and they turn once more to a golden idol. How can my heart be so fickle? What is wrong with me? How can I say the right words and then do the wrong things? But then insist, but the way I do it's the right way. In fact, let's have a debate about it. Maybe it should be on this mountain. Maybe it should be that way. Depending on my faith heritage, maybe I should lift 2 fingers. No, maybe I should lift these fingers. Maybe I should cross these fingers. Do I go up and down, right to left? Do I go up and down, right to left? What do I? How is it that not only can I get astray, but I can lead others astray? How is that? Why is that? The next slide. Your worship of God. The true worship of God is always personal. One of the profound theological truths of the Bible is that there is a personal God. We were created, man and woman, in His image so that we could be in relationship with the personal God who created us. And we take all of the commandments of the Bible, and Jesus says you want to summarize them, you need to be in good relationship with God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and you need to be in good relationship with other people. Love other people as much as you love yourselves. Now, sometimes your true worship of God is public. Just as there were all the signs for Moses, and sometimes they were public signs, so it is with worship. Sometimes your true worship of God is public. Sometimes your true worship of God is private. Coming back to Moses' life, that first 40 years, he's in Egypt. The next 40 years, he's in a different land. When he's 80 years old, God says, I'm going to send you back to Egypt, and I'm going to bring you back to the same mountain, and you're going to worship me once more. 40 years later, at the end of his life, he's now 120 years old because of his anger. See, one time when everybody was grumbling, God told him specifically, and this can seem harsh to us, but the Bible explains to us. God says, for most of my prophets, I speak to them in dreams and visions and other ways. But for my prophet Moses, I speak to him face to face, as one man speaks face to face directly with another man. And the Bible also tells us that when other people are criticizing Moses, his own brother and sister, for instance, the Bible also tells us that God says, oh, stop. Moses is the most humble man in the whole earth. And so, yes, he and I have this deep, intimate relationship. And so, the first time that the people are grumbling in the desert, God tells Moses, hit the rock, and he hits the rock. But then years go by, it's the same scenario. They're still grumbling, they're still complaining, and this time, God says clearly to Moses, Moses, speak to the rock. Moses is angry, and he takes that staff. And instead of speaking to the rock, he turns to the people and he says, you want to see God's power demonstrated? And he strikes the rock the second time. I think that's also instructive. Many times we do what we do just because it worked in the past. In fact, that's our reason for doing it. Well, we've always done it that way in the past. This was always our prior experience. This is oversimplifying farming, okay? I'm oversimplifying farming. My father-in-law would justifiably correct me. Farmers around the world. You know what it takes to be a good farmer around the world? You do everything as you did last year, but you watch what your neighbors are doing. And if they've discovered something new, you try to learn from them. That's an oversimplification of how to be a good farmer around the world. But coming back to Moses, it worked for him in the past, but the problem is God said this time speak. He struck the rock, and God said, okay, you're going to lead people right up to the Canaanite, right up to the land of Canaan. But you're not going to be allowed to go in. That privilege is going to be handed over to this young man, Joshua, who's now spent 40 years under your leadership, being with you step by step. In fact, he's this young man that was so faithful that when we sent the spies to spy out the land, and they all came back, he was the minority report. He and this other guy. I sent all of them out, but only two, and they all came back uniform. This is a great land. We should go into it, absolutely. However, it's full of giants, and so maybe it's not so good. Because in our own eyes, we were like grasshoppers when we were faced up to them. But this young man, Joshua, and this other guy, they said, no, we should go. You tracking with me all these stories in this man's life? And so now here's Moses. When you get a chance, Deuteronomy chapter 34. Later on, Deuteronomy chapter 34. And where's Moses? One more time, it's on the mountain. It's Mount Nebo. And he gets to see the children of Israel. They've been delayed by 40 years, but now they have a chance to go there. And he gets to see that once more. Next slide, Louisa. Your personal relationship with God. How are you worshiping God in spirit and in truth? Both matter. Back to that woman at the well. How did Jesus do what he did? It is truly a mystery. Jesus never condoned sin. He spent his time with sinners. And he never said, oh, we'll give you a pass. I know that it says don't do it, but you're doing it. Let's just kind of, how did Jesus do this? The truth in Jesus' life was uncompromising, even with this woman. And so how we worship does matter. The truth does matter. The world is full of religions that are false and wrong. The truth matters. But it also matters that we're worshiping in the Spirit. For you personally today, how are you worshiping God? In spirit and in truth. What is the public form of your worship of God? What is the private form of your worship of God? Last question. What type of sign has God given to you? God's speaking to us all the time. The Bible has verses like this. Today, if you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts as the children did in the place of Meribah when they were complaining about the lack of water. Today, if you hear God's voice, respond to God's voice. The tragedy is that many of us know more about our zodiac sign than we know about how God speaks to our hearts. God gave specific signs to Moses, but it wasn't about the mountain. It wasn't about the rituals. It was about the relationship that he desires to have with his children. Have you been to Mount Fuji? Have you been to the Acropolis? Have you been to Mount Elbrus? Have you been to Visegrad? Not so far away. Have you been to the top of the mountains in Kenya and seen the entire African plain spread out around you? If you've been to those mountains, have you been to your own personal mountain where you're learning how to worship God in spirit and in truth? Dan, can you please continue, please?
Here's something that I cannot do for you. It's replacing you in your worship. You asked me, Daniel, could you take this chair from me and bring it to another place? I could do that. I said, Daniel, could you cook a meal for me? Yeah, I could do that. But your personal relationship with God is your personal relationship with Him. Your song, what comes to your heart, I can't replace that. I invite you to stand up. We're going to sing this song. As Pastor Ed said, it wasn't about the mountain. It wasn't about the rituals. We happen to use songs to also worship God. But it's your personal relationship with Him. So use this moment to tell Him, to talk to Him personally. Don't necessarily just think about what other people are saying or praying. It's you and Him. It's all about Him. When the music fades, all is stripped away, and the simply come.